We're here to talk about current challenges and opportunities in telemedicine. And that covers a lot of ground, but I think it's important to lay some of the groundwork. We'll touch on some history, some context, some issues that deal with things beyond the law per se, but then focus in on some particular details that I think will be of interest to this group. Some of us in the room are old enough to recognize who this is. I've used this slide in other talks, and not everybody knows who he is. Sometimes I've shown up places nobody knows who he is. But in the bad old days, Dr. Marcus Welby would pick up a phone, and that was about as far as we got in terms of telemedicine. Things have obviously evolved a long way since then. Today, really, we're facing a new world. When we talk about telemedicine today, we're talking about a whole host of tools and platforms, and I will try to sort of organize them into a couple of different categories. I'm going to end up focusing on principally one of those categories in this session, and there's a session later today that will be focusing on one or two of the other categories. We're really betwixt and between. There's really a dynamic tension between that past and that future that I am trying to highlight here. We really, as a profession, as a medical profession, there's one foot in the past, one foot in the future, and the legal structures that surround the physician-patient relationship are, to a very great extent, stuck in the past, even though some of those relationships are now stepping into the future. And we're engaged in a perpetual case of catch-up, or game of catch-up, in trying to fit new structures, new relationships, new tools into old legal structures and frameworks. And that's what we deal with on a regular basis. We have in front of us a set of laws, regulations, rules, and so forth, and every day we're faced with new facts, and we try to sort of blend those two together. When this is happening on a broad basis, it becomes more difficult. Obviously in healthcare, I'm sure in other areas as well, we all like to think that we're working on something that is so critical and so important, but here often it is a life and death situation, and there are very strong opinions on all sides in these issues. As I was in the session downstairs earlier today, I was tweeting from the session and also looking at some of my friends' tweets on Twitter, and one posted a comment about a very low percentage of folks today using any sort of shared economy, gig economy kinds of resources, and he was lumping that together with things like telemedicine. So I would just ask if people are willing to raise hands. How many of you in the room use something like Uber? How many use PrePost or other grocery delivery services? I won't tell. And how many of you have ever used telemedicine? We have one maybe. Okay, we'll get into the definitions here in a moment, but there's a couple of folks.
Calling your doctor for an appointment?
No, that's Marcus Welby. Sorry? Patient portals. Sure. I think that's an aspect of telemedicine, basically trying to do something that would otherwise require some more traditional kind of communication. So why do we engage in telemedicine? Why are we trying to do this? There are many forces at play, and in our current healthcare economy, there is a continual driving force to try to reduce costs and maintain or improve quality. So the question is, what are the kinds of tools that the healthcare system can bring to bear on these challenges? And again, stated broadly, telemedicine is one of those categories of tools that we're trying to use in order to keep costs in check, even reduce costs. Part of the issue is the growing population, the growing silver tsunami, if you will, that some or all of us are a part of, or we will be soon. And the issue that we need to sort of create more We can't necessarily mint as many new doctors as we're creating older Americans who need more medical services, so we need to create new ways of addressing those needs. Oh, and by the way, back to my earlier question, utilization of things like Uber, Peapod, such and such, and telemedicine stand at about the same level population-wide in the United States. Anybody willing to hazard a guess what that percentage might be? About 6%. So we're talking about a bunch of early adopters at this point. But my point is that given the silver tsunami on our hands, that 6% is very soon going to become 60%. So we need to be sure that we have the business and legal structures in place to accommodate that growth. So, as promised, what is telemedicine? Really a number of different domains that make up the totality of telemedicine. Synchronous telemedicine, that I think is what all of us think of first when we think of telemedicine. That's a real-time video conversation with a clinician. Okay? Asynchronous would be a store and forward kind of communication. I collect information of some sort, whether it's a picture, a video, vitals, something else, and I forward it to a clinician who reviews it and gets back to me with a diagnostic or treatment recommendation. Remote monitoring. This is something like having a connected device in your home, whether it's a blood pressure cuff or something else, that is relaying data either on a once-in-a-while basis or on a continual live stream basis back to a clinician for monitoring in some particular circumstance. And I'll touch on each of these, though we're going to focus on the live video aspect. I'm going to touch on some examples in each of these other areas as well. Mobile health is really going to be the topic of the session downstairs later today, and I encourage all of you to attend that one as well. On the mobile health front, we have the deluge of smartphone apps that are health and wellness related, some more clinical than others. There's a wide range. Also sensors, wearables. We'll ask the room again, how many people have used or use currently a wearable activity tracker on a regular basis? Handful of people. So, as I said, live synchronous video is going to be the area that we're going to focus on primarily here today. So that is the situation where you have a patient in front of a computer, smartphone, whatever, having a live video conversation with a clinician where there is some sharing of information, current data, medical history. You know the clinician's name, the clinician knows your name, and hopefully knows a little bit more about you as well. These, in some circumstances, are paid through insurance. We'll touch on the payment landscape in a little bit, but many of these are being promoted as employee benefits. So it's it's still in the convenience factor, and that's still why we see the adoption rate in the 6% range, much as those of us who prefer to have groceries delivered to our doors on our schedule, we prefer to see clinicians on our schedule, not theirs, and it's really a convenience factor. This photograph is from a circumstance where the remote physician is a surgeon, and the patient and patient's parent, I believe in this picture, are about to travel hundreds of miles to his medical center for a specialty surgery. So there's pre and post encounters that are necessary but are completely impractical for a patient traveling hundreds of miles to do in any other way. So for the rest of us, as I was saying, a lot of this is sort of market driven. We want everything and we want it now. We want it in the palms of our hands. We want it while we're doing something else. And why should we wait? And in this day and age, many of us don't have to wait. And that's not crazy. And the healthcare system needs to be able to accommodate that, just as many other sectors of the economy are accommodating that. And it's not without dislocation to the status quo. I mean, that's the way this works. This is a disruption I kind of hate that disruptive innovation phrase because I think it's often misused, and I think a lot of things that are called disruptive innovation aren't as disruptive as Christensen would define it, but I think you get what I'm talking about. Disruptive innovation, and this is one of them. Having the ability to reach a physician on call via your iPhone from wherever, whenever, is definitely a disruption to the way healthcare services have been delivered traditionally. And obviously now our lawyer wheels can start turning. There are a lot of issues that can be raised by delivering healthcare in this manner, and we need to deal with them. Some of these things have been dealt with adequately to date. Some folks in the medical and legal establishments would argue have not been dealt with adequately. But we're always playing catch up. That's sort of the way the world works. The law is never out in front of reality. So we're always playing catch up, and we need to deal with that. And I think a lot of folks are sometimes frustrated with that and are constantly crying for Congress to pass a law, this, that, and the other thing, whether it's in the realm of health data, privacy and security, ransomware, whether it's in the arena of telemedicine or other areas of innovation in healthcare or in other parts of society. Congress is never going to be at the leading edge, and certainly not in the current political environment where they can't get out of their own way. Here I'm going to delve into a couple of state-specific issues and note that, to quote Gibson, the future is already here, it just isn't evenly distributed. And nowhere is this more true than in the realm of state regulation, where we have 50 laboratories. It's a wonderful thing, but they're all operating on their own clocks, on their own schedules, and some of them get places before others do. Colorado is set to recognize telemedicine providers for network adequacy requirements under the Health Information Exchange rules. I'm not going to delve into Health Information Exchange, but it's important to recognize that that's a whole set of rules under health reform, Obamacare. And what's notable to me is that it is notable that a state is taking these resources into account as available resources. I ask myself, why is this even a question? If you have an in-state licensed physician who's available to provide telemedicine services to someone in network, in state, why is this a revelation? Why is this something new and different? I don't think that it should be. It's nice that Colorado has said, yes, we're going to recognize this as part of the resource in calculating network adequacy. The National Association of Insurance Commissioners has recognized at least the possibility of this to be applied on a broader basis, so that's encouraging. And the Urban Institute has looked at this across a number of other states. And if you're interested in this particular issue in terms of availability of resources and the network adequacy issue, I encourage you to take a look at the Urban Institute report. So, how do we get here? Where are we going? There's some links here to state level Medicare and Medicaid coverage, explanations and documents. Again, as I said, you can reach this presentation online, click through the links, and do some extensive reading and research if you were so inclined. As I alluded to earlier, this all started off in the employee health benefit realm, where employers are seeking to make health care more attractive, more available. It's all about convenience and benefit to the individual employee and employees' families. There's been a lot said about wellness programs in the workplace. There's a lot been said that the value of wellness programs is really not in the wellness, but it's all about employee recruitment and retention. If you look at the dollars spent on employee wellness versus the dollars saved in terms of healthcare, you might start to appreciate that perspective. There's certainly wellness programs that work, but there are a lot that don't. But my point here, not to harp on wellness programs, my point is to look at the employee health benefit market as something driving innovation. Here, that is driving innovation in terms of accessibility of telemedicine. Now, to the extent that we include within telemedicine the wearable activity tracker market. Some people object to being given activity trackers by the employers or by the employer-sponsored health plan because they don't want to share too much information with their employers. And there's a real need to segment, to have the so-called separation of church and state between the employee health plan and the employer.
It's a super question. How does HIPAA factor into any of this? Is the data that you gather from these trackers protected health information?
To the extent that it's given to you by a health plan, I would argue yes.
So the employers aren't going to know.
Excuse me?
So employers aren't going to know.
Are not.
Right.
Correct. Right. If it's done right, if it's done through the employer health plan rather than directly through the employee through an HR office, if it's done properly through the health plan, then yes, it's protected health information. And that's an important distinction, and not everybody gets that. And the employee health benefit in terms of telemedicine, this is something that has been marketed over the past, say, 5 years or so as this market has been growing. Telemedicine providers like the Teladocs and American Wells of the world market to large employers and say, hey, don't you want to offer this great convenience to all your employees? And they say, yeah, that's fantastic. And somebody, who needs to go to the doctor to check on that sore throat or that, the proverbial hangnail doesn't need to lose half a day of work to go down to the doctor's office, drive, look for parking, et cetera, and can have that encounter even from his or her desk at work. 10, 15-minute encounter, maybe have a simple prescription logged in on behalf of the individual employee, and it's great for the employee, great for the employer, cheaper all around, less time spent all around. So even if it's not run through the health plan as an insured benefit, the employer is happy to pay extra, a couple bucks a month per employee for access to this service. Great benefit to the bottom line. But again, back to adoption and utilization, we're only going to hit 6% of people, if we're lucky, using this service. Everybody ought to be using it. That benefit would extend to everyone in the office. Everyone should not be taking those half-day treks to the doctor's office for the minor ailment. But again, only 6% of people will avail themselves. The payment for telemedicine services is finding its way into Medicaid and Medicare and commercial health insurance on a limited basis. We're dealing with 50 laboratories. There are certain statements that can be made on a federal level in terms of Medicaid coverage. There's one particularly intriguing and encouraging development come about in recent months on the Medicaid front, which seems to say that an initial in-office medical visit to screen someone in for home health services to be paid for by Medicaid can be done on a remote basis. So that's huge. Medicare has approved telemedicine for use in very narrow circumstances, initially only for the real remote situations, like the example that I showed where someone was speaking to a patient hundreds of miles away. One of the kickers there is that the patient needs to be in a healthcare provider's office or facility, which to my mind kind of defeats part of the whole purpose of this thing. But again, Medicare is evolving, and if we think about telemedicine in a broader sense, then there are currently some benefits funded by Medicare that include telemedicine. For example, chronic care management, which some of you may be familiar with, which is entirely a non-face-to-face benefit under Medicare. It's mostly expected to be provided through text and portal kinds of messages rather than by video, but video could be a part of that as well. Again, there are a lot of details here, a lot of little bits and pieces. There's a lot of evolution. There's always a stack of bills pending in Congress, being promoted by someone or another, looking to expand coverage for telemedicine. It's an interesting area and worth tracking. Other limitations. So payment is one big area of limitation. The other limitation is that great bastion of the guild mentality, the state medical boards. That is just an area that has led to continual fights on a state-by-state battlefield basis, although we have come to the point now where in-state physicians or physicians licensed in a particular state are generally recognized as being able to enter into a new physician-patient relationship via a telemedicine encounter and prescribe medications as a result of that encounter. So in the world of the guild mentality of medical boards, that's huge. Yes.
Does that include Massachusetts?
It does. There are limitations around that, but it does include Massachusetts, and there have certainly been fights here as there have been elsewhere.
Has the medical board in Massachusetts issued any guidance or advisories on this?
Well, there's a link embedded in a later slide, but it is to a prescription guidance that is based not on the advent of telemedicine, but of the advent of a technology of a previous decade, which is the ability to get a prescription from an internet pharmacy. So Mass Board of Registration of Medicine has addressed that, and basically there must be a true quote-unquote physician-patient relationship in place in order for a prescription to be filed with an internet pharmacy.
They don't say you can do it or you can't do it, or these are the strictures, or this is the kind of case you can deal with, or any guidance like that.
Well, generally speaking, no controlled substances.
I understand about prescriptions, but I mean as far as telemedicine generally.
Oh, well, every one of the boards dances around the phrase, you need to you need to have an established physician-patient relationship, right, in order to do this. Some states are more strenuous than others in saying, well, you can't establish a physician-patient relationship over your iPhone. That has to be the laying on of hands and all that. I'll get to that. There's some pending litigation in that department. The Interstate Medical Licensure Compact is something that's been sort of ginned up by the industry and has started to get some real traction. Some of you may be familiar with the Nurse Compact, Interstate Nurse Compact. So nurse licensed in State A can practice in State B. I pulled up the Nursing Compact map just for comparison to see if there were some sort of philosophical similarities. There's some overlap, but not 100% overlap. So I didn't think that it's worth sort of exploring that as sort of a philosophical issue based on geography. But the point here is that the dark blue states have compact legislation enacted, the light blue states are working on it, and the rest, maybe someday. And Massachusetts is in the maybe someday department. The commonalities may be that the folks who are more interested in this are the folks in the large rectangular states, which kind of makes sense. And the problem there is that there needs to be broader adoption in order for this to really work. The other problem is that it's still early days. So even in the states that have adopted the legislation, we still don't have a structure, we don't have a process in place yet, as we do in the nursing compact states. I mean, there's a very clear procedure. If you're licensed as a nurse in State A, this is the way you automatically get your license in State B. It doesn't exist yet under this compact, and that time will come. Meanwhile, as some of you may be aware from earlier days in teleradiology, I know radiologists who have licenses in 50 states. A little kooky, but that's what they need to do in order to read scans from all over the country. I know physicians who have licenses in 20 or 30 states, and they work full-time with one of the telemedicine providers that have their own captive medical groups and provide services nationwide, with one or two exceptions. We'll get to those. There's always the couple of laggards. If they're providing services in 47 to 49 states, they need easy access to physicians who are licensed in all of those states. And there are a number of different business models. Some have the captive physician groups. Some simply provide the technology platform to local provider organizations. And some have even, one company, one of the companies I work with announced at the American Telemedicine Association meeting the beginning of this week, that they're basically setting up an exchange which allows any physician with excess capacity to provide that through a hub to somebody else. So anyone can log on and that excess capacity becomes available to the whole. Okay, a couple of outlier states and some interesting legal stuff. Texas and North Carolina, for those of you who don't have your handy dandy placemat like my daughter does, just try to struggle with the state maps. Can practice limits imposed by a medical board be an antitrust violation? I think this is a fascinating issue, something that people have been talking about for many years. Some of you who may be familiar with what life was like before lawyers could advertise, may be familiar with the Bates, Arizona case. I think it's Bates. This is sort of falls in the same exact category. So there's a decision that came down from the U.S. Supreme Court last year. It has to do with North Carolina and has to do with teeth whitening. The dentists of North Carolina didn't want anyone else to do teeth whitening. That's dentist work. So Board of Registration in Dentistry enforced that rule. This ended up before the Supreme Court. Any fearless predictions how this went down? Well, the walls are starting to tumble. So I apologize for all the text. But again, this will be in your information that you can read later. The key issue here is that the Supreme Court found that a state board whose membership are active market participants may invoke the state action defense only when two requirements are satisfied. The challenge restraint must be clearly articulated as state policy, and the policy must be actively supervised by a state official or agency that's not a participant in the market being regulated. In English, doctors can't regulate doctors, right? You need an independent state authority to inject itself into this proceeding. Or one of the examples given by the Federal Trade Commission, which was immediately besieged by calls from medical boards and market participants for clarification after this decision came down. They said, imagine a state has an electrician's board, and by statute the board consists of 3 electricians and 4 non-electricians, and everything in committee needs to pass by a supermajority. At first blush, you might think this is not controlled by electricians because electricians only have 3 out of 7 seats. But if anything needs to pass by supermajority, then you see that nothing can pass without the vote of an electrician. So even in that circumstance, that board would be caught by the rule in this case. In fact, the North Carolina board was caught by the rule in this case, and that rule about teeth whitening by non-dentists was reversed. There's a link to the guidance and the materials, a worthwhile read. On to Texas. So we're talking about face-to-face encounters, establishing the physician-patient relationship, the laying on of hands, all that good stuff. The Texas Board of Medicine said you can't prescribe medication to a patient unless you've laid on hands, unless you've had that face-to-face encounter. There was a regulation in place early on that was a little vague on the subject, so the board issued a letter ruling. Teladoc, which is one of the big players in this market, it's a publicly traded company now. Teladoc sued the board, and the board, after the fact, got their act together and promulgated a rule that was clearer, but that didn't help. This has now been a 5-year-long fight. It is now sitting, the state board has appealed the decision of the U.S. District Court, which is in favor of Teladoc, to Fifth Circuit, and that's where it sits right now. So Texas is one of these holdouts. If you're in Texas and you need an antibiotic, don't try American Well or Teladoc because they can't help you, at least not yet. A couple of other states. Indiana has recently come to the table. Their face-to-face rule for prescriptions has been eliminated. That change goes into effect in the very near future. Alaska, Arkansas, and Texas, as I just mentioned, still require face-to-face visits to establish the physician-patient relationship. So again, not something where you can initiate the visit via telemedicine unless you're already a patient. So it doesn't mean you can't use telemedicine, it's just you can't use it in this way that the employee benefit plans and now there are direct-to-consumer iPhone apps available. You can't use those in those states unless you have a pre-existing relationship with a clinician. Here, as I said earlier, the prescribing physician must have that relationship, and as I said, the rule came up first in the context of online pharmacies, and that little bit of board of registration explication is linked to from the slide. State licensure is required. Massachusetts is not part of the compact, at least not yet. We'll see if we get there. Don't know how long to hold our breath for that one. So beyond the quote-unquote physical issues, yes?
Is it just a prescription, not like, for example, a nurse being able to give somebody an IV in their home or something like that?
So a nurse giving an IV in the home is, I'm sorry, what are you asking there?
For example, can you call the doctor and say, okay, this time I'm feeling that, okay, I'm going to send, rather than just give you a prescription, I'm going to send a nurse to your house and she'll give you an IV.
So in that circumstance, I imagine you'd be calling your existing physician, right, who may have an arrangement with a home health agency and may be prepared based on a pre-existing relationship to make that prescription, which results in the dispatch of someone from a home health agency. A little different from what I'm talking about in terms of technology only.
There's a new service that I've seen in New York and LA,
Yep.
where, like, for a hangover, right? They have these people who come out and they give you, a couple of bags of saline and your hangover is gone, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
They call the doctor says, okay, yeah, you've got a hangover. I prescribe 2 bags of, saline, and off goes the nurse.
Right. So, Massachusetts, as I said, you can establish the relationship via remote means with an in-state clinician, and once that relationship is established, that clinician can issue prescription. So yes, that could work.
So maybe a bit of a twist on that question. So is it only physicians so far in terms of licenses that are able to practice telemedicine?
Well, I've focused here on the boards of registration in medicine and physicians, but that's not to say that it wouldn't extend to other clinicians who might be able to prescribe. So as I said, this has been expanding into chronic conditions, into behavioral health. That's sort of where the money is in medicine these days, and that's where these types of providers are looking to expand their services. So I mentioned earlier the chronic care management benefit under Medicare. There are also, more broadly than that, there's the notion of having a longer-term relationship between a clinician and a patient, and some of the commercial services are now setting things up so every time you call, you don't just go into the pool and get the next doc who's licensed in Massachusetts. You can say, I want to talk to Dr. Jones again. He was nice. And you get queued up, and you might not get that person immediately, but you'll be connected with that person. And obviously, there's certainly a value to that in the behavioral health context, where you can even have sort of a course of 12 visits with an individual counselor, and that service is available now through services like American Well. That's existing, that's growing. The Veterans Administration announced within the past week, I think also at the ATA, a behavioral health initiative that they are kicking off. They're already a big user of telemedicine within their network. This is another aspect within which they plan to operate in the future. So, up until now, we've been talking about synchronous telemedicine. Next category, asynchronous or store and forward technology. Whether it's through a questionnaire or a photo or a combination of the two, you collect information on your computer, on your smartphone, through an app, one way or another, and then submit it, forward it one way or another to a clinician who has the time, not at the same time. You're not waiting for an appointment in this traditional sense. Review the information and then get back to you with a diagnosis, recommendation for treatment, something else. So again, in the context where you have an existing relationship with a clinician, totally makes sense. This has been built into people's workflows. That's part of the portal issue. Portal question that came up earlier, is portal use telemedicine? Yes, it's sort of asynchronous store and forward kind of technology. It's one step removed from emailing back and forth with your clinician, since most clinicians won't do that anymore, even though under HIPAA, if you say, please email me, please send me a text, they're required to accommodate that request on your part, but most clinicians will not do that. That's a whole other story. An example from the asynchronous world, ripped from the headlines this week, involving a client of mine. JAMA Dermatology conveniently decided to publish a study while the American Telemedicine Association annual meeting was in session, saying, as the Wall Street Journal put it, we found misdiagnoses of skin problems. I mean, there's never a misdiagnosis in the office, right? It's just was not addressed in the study. Basically, the investigators put together a bunch of pictures, attached pseudonyms to the pictures, and submitted them through about a dozen different telemedicine sites. Some are dermatology specific, some are general telemedicine, and then they published a journal article saying a lot of these guys got it wrong. My client was called out as one or two in particular because of their business model. As I said before, a lot of telemedicine is driven by convenience. So this client has basically set up an informational service. It is not healthcare. It is not medicine. There is no physician-patient relationship. The patient is anonymous on this First Derm platform. The physician is anonymous on this platform. My client decided to take it all one step further, and he likes to tout the company as the first teledermatology platform that accepts Bitcoin as payment for complete anonymity. His clinicians actually got everything right in this study, but they were called out specifically by the academic medical investigators as saying they weren't licensed to provide services in the state where the fake patients lived, or supposedly lived. So they were called out. Again, the model is different. There's an accepted way of doing this where it is not healthcare services, it's informational services. The general gist of a message that might go back to an image submitted through this service is, gee, looks like X, you should get the following over-the-counter cream, ought to clear up in a couple of weeks if it doesn't go see a doctor, or I think you should have that biopsied before tomorrow, and with a range in between.
How does that not run afoul of the practice of medicine regulations?
It's an opinion. It's totally covered with disclaimers. It's information. Again, most of the volume for services like this, not just my client, but other services like this, most of the volume is from folks who are sharing images of new parents dealing with diaper rashes, and folks who are sending naughty pictures over the internet with STD questions, and they don't want to go to their regular docs. That's just sort of where the volume is. So it's a service. It's of interest. There are a lot of skin moles issues, and that's where the biopsy recommendation comes in. And people are glad to have that recommendation because, frankly, it takes about 30 days to get an appointment with a dermatologist. This lets you get a result within 24 hours.
Isn't the service representing that the person who's making the diagnosis is a physician?
Yes, but the service that's being offered is not medical care.
It doesn't even have to be a dermatologist, right?
Well, in this case it is. They're board certified dermatologists, not necessarily licensed in your jurisdiction, and there's all kinds of QA that goes on. There's testing of derms and their onboarding process, and there's an overread process and QA that goes on a regular basis.
Out of curiosity, have any lawsuits stemmed from like misdiagnosis or malpractice? I know they're calling it informational services, but I can see where a plaintiff's attorney would say otherwise. So,
No.
And I assume this isn't typically covered by insurance or Medicaid, this type of service?
Correct. I mean, and it's relatively cheap, $30. So it's, again, it's the convenience factor. Do I want to go take a half a day off of work and if I can even get into a dermatologist. Otherwise, I'm going to my GP or an NP in the GP's office and saying, there's this mole in my arm.
No, I mean, I totally get the convenience part of it.
Right.
But from the Board of Registration of Medicine's perspective, I think that they may take a different view of it. I mean, they may see something like this as the practice of medicine, and if a case came before them, they certainly might want to make an example of that physician. Again,
I mean, they'd have to subpoena the records of the company to figure out what physician it was even. It's an anonymous interaction. Anyway, I'll offer that just as sort of one example of sort of where the bleeding edge is in all of this. So I think we all have a pretty good, mental picture of what a traditional telemedicine encounter is. And this is just one example of some of the things that are going on at the bleeding edge, so to speak. These I've reproduced in the materials the recommendations from the JAMA Dermatology panel of authors about things that should be done differently. I would say that all of them look reasonable on their face, but when applied to this particular circumstance, start to raise some questions about whether they make sense. Moving on to the third quadrant of the 4 types of telemedicine, remote monitoring, and again, you'll hear more about this afternoon. People familiar with the Whitting's scales, things like that? This is an internet-connected scale. So why would you want to use an internet-connected scale?
Well, Fitbit makes one. I mean, it's in with all your other, how many steps you took and how much weight you lost.
Right. So you have a personal dashboard. So that's the personal data, and that falls under the legal framework of what's in a PHR. It's patient-generated data. It's not provided to you by a clinician. It's not being used clinically. But wait, there's more. A Whitting scale can be prescribed to you and sent home with you after you have surgery for congestive heart failure, because leading reason for readmission post congestive heart failure surgery is weight gain, because your medication is not titrated appropriately. And in this world of trying to avoid readmissions, it is in the physicians, in the hospitals' financial interest as well as quality interest to send you home with a Whitting scale, have you step on the scale a couple of times a day, and have an NP get an alert go off on a dashboard if your weight is up by more than X%. The nurse will then call you at home and say, we're changing your medication because you're retaining too much water. We need to change the diuretic. Fantastic. We move very quickly from quote-unquote stupid stuff in the self-tracking realm to a saved readmission, a saved life, improvement in healthcare. Many examples where these things sort of have dual use, and I think it's very encouraging, very exciting area. Mobile health apps, again, we can go from the sublime to the ridiculous. The issue to think about in terms of privacy regulation is, personal health record versus medical record, different regimes. As we'll hear from our keynote speaker after this session, there's certainly regulation within the realm of things that are not strictly health data under HIPPA. Federal Trade Commission and other agencies regulate in that environment as well. So we're looking at a brave new world. I think it's very exciting. I think there's a lot of opportunity. And I hope this has helped in terms of framing the range of issues and the range of things that we may be talking about when we talk about telemedicine. HIPPA always comes up. It's the elephant in the room, so to speak, and there are, as I said, Federal Trade Commission, other regulatory agencies. As our earlier speaker downstairs mentioned, there's certainly state-level privacy issues to be concerned about, many of which are more strict than HIPAA and more specific than Federal Trade Commission regulation in this arena. A couple of recent reports came out. I had the opportunity to speak with the authors of these reports on data breaches, the range, the types of data breaches that happen. That's the thing that we need to be concerned about when we're talking about electronic delivery of care and storage and transfer of information one way or another very important issue. As earlier speakers mentioned, it's something that's really worth investing in, and a lot of people haven't quite gotten that message. And I think that's one, if you're working with folks who are developing new modalities of communication and treatment, this is an important thing to impress upon them. You really need to invest in security up front, because if you think about it later rather than before, the horse is out of the barn. So progress, I think it's progress. We may think sometimes that we're just going in circles, but my view of history is it's a series of evolving circles. We're sort of going along in a slinky, moving forward. We do go around and around, but we do move forward in some sense. But we do need to keep in mind the past. As they say, those who ignore history are doomed to repeat it. And it is important to recognize that there are all sorts of issues that we've dealt with before. We have regulatory structures that have existed for a long time. It is possible to work within existing regulatory structures and understand and deal with new things. We don't always need a new rule in order to accommodate new things. So of course, in the licensure arena, that's maybe not the case, but there could be an understanding of what the potential of new tools is and ways in which we can use them productively. As I said, there's a million ways to reach me. My presentation is on my blog with live links to other resources, and I encourage you to take a look, and feel free to contact me today or after today with any questions or comments.